The morning air in Toledo, Ohio, hung low and gray like a wet curtain drawn across the sky. The streets shimmered with last night's drizzle, and the trees stood stiff with damp resignation. It wasn't quite winter yet, but the breath that slipped from Dorian Ellison's mouth came out white and fleeting, curling upward before vanishing like a secret he was trying to keep. He stood at the edge of the school bus loop, shoulders tucked in, eyes low, his hands jammed deep into the faded pockets of a denim jacket that had seen better years, maybe even better decades. The jacket wasn't trendy, not even retro enough to earn ironic cool points. It sagged at the seams and drooped at the collar, one sleeve frayed where the stitching had long since given up. A dark stain clung near the chest pocket, oil, maybe, or paint that had dried so deep into the fabric that it had become part of the jacket story. But none of that was what made Dorian a target that morning. What drew attention? What made him the punchline, was the large, solemn patch stitched into the back, a bald eagle, wings stretched wide, talons gripping a set of arrows, its chest shielded in red and white stripes. The colors had faded, the threads pulled thin, but the pride sewn into it was still there. Proud. Patriotic. Misunderstood. The moment the laughter started, Dorian knew he was today's entertainment. "Ayo," shouted a voice too loud for morning, thrift store called. "They want their trash back." Dorian didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He recognized the voice, Javian Bryant, every hallway's self-proclaimed comedian, always flanked by Roy and Tez, who laughed even when they didn't get the joke. Behind them, a ripple of chuckles spread across the courtyard. Some kids laughed big, bent over, teeth flashing, others snickered just loud enough to be seen laughing, hoping the cruelty would pass them by today. A girl near the front of the bus line. Aaliyah, who had once loaned Dorian a pencil in 7th grade and hadn't spoken to him since, whispered something to her friend and covered her mouth as if hiding a yawn, but the smirk was unmistakable. Dorian shifted his weight and focused on the cracks in the pavement. There were 3 in front of him, one that split like lightning, one that looked like a boot print fossilized in concrete, and one that led straight to a puddle glinting with bus fumes. He stared at them like they might answer a question he hadn't figured out how to ask. The jacket clung to his shoulders like armor that had grown too heavy to carry but too sacred to take off. "Did your grandpa get that off a cereal box?" Javian sneered, stepping closer now, gesturing to the patch like it was a stain. "What's it even mean, Bird Club?" The laughter that followed was louder this time. Even some of the 6th graders who were usually too nervous to laugh along snorted and pointed. Dorian bit the inside of his cheek. Not because the joke hurt, though it did, but because he wasn't about to give Javian the satisfaction of a reaction. He thought about saying something. Just once. Something quick and sharp and final. But the words piled up like traffic behind his teeth, and all he could do was swing his backpack higher onto one shoulder and walk toward the school's double doors. Inside, the hallway was warm but no kinder. Laughter from outside leaked through the walls, and though the joke stopped, the feeling didn't. By 3rd period, Mr. Gregory's whiteboard had been defaced with a crude version of the eagle patch, this time wearing sunglasses and a top hat, with the caption, "Captain Fashion," scrawled underneath in red marker. Mr. Gregory wiped it away before class officially started, but not fast enough. The class was already grinning. Dorian sat with his jacket slung over his chair, trying to fold it small enough to disappear behind him, but denim wasn't quiet. Every time he moved, it rubbed against plastic, loud, embarrassing, inescapable. Lunchtime was worse. He sat at his usual spot near the back of the cafeteria, peeling the crust off his sandwich, pretending not to hear the eagle sounds behind him, flapping arms, mock screeches. One 8th grader cawed like a bird, fluttering past his table with a dramatic swoop. "Yo, look out," someone shouted. "He's gonna take flight." Dorian didn't look up. He just focused on the crumbs he pushed across the table, eyes low, shoulders higher than usual. Across from him sat Maya Cruz, her braids tucked into a navy beanie, a juice box in one hand and quiet strength in the other. She didn't laugh. She never did. You good? She asked, not softly but sincerely. Dorian nodded. Lie number 1. She didn't press, didn't look at him with pity, didn't give him a speech about ignoring bullies. She just popped her juice box with a sharp twist and said, "Did you finish the science project?" He didn't answer. She moved on. Small mercies matter when you're drowning. In gym, the mockery continued. Javian had evolved into a full-blown drill sergeant impersonator, barking orders with military precision. Ellison. Drop and give me 20, he shouted across the locker room. Sir, yes sir. My jacket says I'm qualified. More laughter. Coach didn't hear or didn't care, he was halfway through yelling at someone else about untied shoes. Dorian zipped his hoodie over the jacket, but he still wore it. He always did. That jacket had once belonged to someone who mattered. Someone who had stared down danger without flinching, who had never heard these cruel jokes or seen the way kids shrank under the weight of laughter. That man, his grandfather, had worn it with pride. And Dorian, no matter how embarrassed he felt, had promised himself that he would never fold it away in a drawer or pretend it didn't mean something. Even if it meant becoming the joke. That night, when he walked home, the sky had shifted into that silver-gray blur between dusk and dark, the kind that made the world feel hushed and too big all at once. He didn't go straight to his room like most kids might. Instead, he dropped his backpack by the door and stepped into the den. It was the quietest part of the house, almost sacred in its silence. Against the far wall stood a chipped wooden bookshelf that leaned slightly to one side, as if time had asked it to bow. On the top shelf sat a folded American flag sealed in a triangular glass case, next to it a stack of black and white photos, a pair of rusted dog tags, and a picture of a man with the same cheekbones as Dorian but a sharper stare. Ronald R.J. Ellison. His grandfather. A name that felt like a story never told. Dorian stared at the shelf and said nothing. His mom always left the light on in this room, like the shelf was a lighthouse guiding someone home. She didn't talk much about RJ. Not on his birthday, not on holidays, not even when Dorian had first asked who the man in the picture was. The only thing she had ever done was give him that jacket, quietly, one rainy evening, without explanation. He had pulled it on and smelled the scent of old cologne still embedded in the denim, a strong, old-school aftershave that somehow made him sit up straighter without knowing why. He didn't know the whole story, but he felt it. That jacket wasn't fashion. It was history. Behind him, his mom stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You all right?" she asked. Dorian didn't turn around. "Something happened at school." Still nothing. She walked beside him, not forcing answers but standing close enough to offer understanding. "They made fun of the jacket again," he said at last, his voice low. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the photograph of her father, eyes soft but focused. "I could wear something else," Dorian offered. "It's old." "It's not like I have to," she cut him off gently, her voice firm but not angry. "You wear what you want. They don't get to decide what matters." He looked up at her. She looked tired, not just from the day, but from years of carrying stories too heavy to tell. "What did he do?" "Really?" Dorian asked. "You never told me." She glanced at the folded flag. "He served," she said. "That's all. That's enough." But it didn't feel like enough. Not when the jokes came every day. Not when the patch on his back made him feel smaller instead of stronger. "I'm tired of being the joke," he whispered. "They don't even know what it means." His mom placed her hand on his shoulder. "Most of them never will," she said quietly. "So what's the point? Why wear it if no one understands?" Her hand squeezed gently. "Because you understand. That's the point." She walked back to the kitchen, leaving Dorian standing in front of the shelf, jacket zipped halfway, questions swirling in his chest. He sat down on the carpet, leaning back against the wall, staring at the photograph. One picture showed RJ with his arm around a fellow soldier in front of a dusty truck, both of them young and laughing. Another photo showed him standing in front of a building marked Camp Taji, Iraq, 2005. Dorian stared hard at that one, as if trying to read between the grainy pixels for something he hadn't yet learned. A thought flickered through his mind, quiet, unexpected, and impossibly loud: "You're wearing more than a jacket." He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But he was about to find out. Act2, the den and the legacy. The next morning arrived not with sunlight but with a reluctant grayness, as though the sky itself hadn't quite committed to the new day. Dorian lay still in bed, listening to the soft creaks and murmurs of the house waking up. Pipes expanding in the walls, his mother's quiet footsteps padding across the hallway, the whir of the heater pushing air that never quite warmed the corners. His alarm had already gone off twice, the digital numbers blinking indifferently as if to say get up or don't, it's on you. His legs felt heavy under the blanket, like they knew what kind of day it was before his mind had caught up. Veterans Day. A day the school recognized with a half-hearted assembly and a printed program on folded copier paper, a day most kids only remembered because it meant a weird schedule and a shorter final period. For Dorian, it was different. Not because of the flag or the speeches. But because of the jacket still draped over the chair in the corner, his grandfather's jacket. The same one that had made him the target all week. It sat there like a question, daring him to wear it again. He stared at it while tying his shoes, his fingers fumbling with the laces. The patch seemed louder in the silence. He thought about leaving it behind. Just this once. Wearing a hoodie. Blending in. He could hear Javian's voice in his head already, mimicking a drill sergeant, turning his silence into an invitation for another round of mockery. He rubbed his eyes, the weight of indecision pressing into his chest. Down the hall, he heard the bathroom door creak open, his mom getting ready for another long shift at the medical center. That meant he had maybe 15 minutes before she called out her usual morning check-in. He reached for the hoodie on his dresser but paused, his hand hovering. That phrase, "You're wearing more than a jacket," whispered again, uninvited. He didn't know where it had come from. It had echoed in his dreams last night, weaving through the images of sandstorms, trucks, and soldiers whose names he didn't know but whose eyes looked just like his. He looked back at the denim. There was still a faint trace of aftershave in the fabric, like time had folded itself into the seams. The smell reminded him of barbershops and Old Spice, of handshakes that meant something, of quiet strength. Before he could make up his mind, a sound broke his trance, a car pulling up outside. Tires crunching softly over the gravel driveway. He blinked. No one ever came this early. Not friends, not neighbors, not even the mailman. A few seconds passed, then 3 firm knocks on the front door. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. 2 knocks followed by a pause, then 1 short knock. A pattern, like someone trying to say more with less. Dorian stood up cautiously and peeked out through the living room curtain. A black SUV idled at the curb. Clean, but not flashy. No tinted windows, no sirens. And standing next to it, perfectly still, was a tall man in a sharply pressed military uniform, arms behind his back, cap tucked under one arm, silver streaks at his temples. He looked like the kind of man who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. "Ma." Dorian called down the hallway, still staring at the stranger on their porch. "What?" came her voice from the bathroom, muffled through the wall. There's a guy at the door. In a uniform. Army, I think." A pause. Then quick footsteps. She stepped into the hallway still in her scrubs, toothbrush in hand, eyeliner half drawn. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she approached the window. And then, something changed in her face. Her lips parted. Her breath hitched just enough to notice. She stared at the man like he had stepped out of a photograph, or maybe a memory she'd boxed away. "That's General Hanley," she said, more to herself than to Dorian. "You know him?" She nodded, eyes still fixed on the man outside. "He served with your grandfather in Iraq. I haven't seen him since the funeral." Dorian's heart quickened. "A general?" "At their front door." She pulled open the door slowly. The general stood with the same solemn composure. He removed his hat as she opened the screen. "Mrs. Ellison," he said respectfully, with a nod. "I hope I'm not intruding." "No," she said, her voice quiet, steady but unsure. "Not at all. I'm in town for the Veterans Day Assembly at Central Middle. I was given your address by the principal's office late last night." He glanced toward Dorian, who had just stepped forward into view. "I hope that's all right." "Of course," she said. "Is everything okay?" "I saw your son yesterday," Hanley said, his voice lowering slightly. "Didn't say anything at the time. But I recognized the patch." Dorian stood still, unsure what to say or how to move. The general looked at him, not with pity, or confusion, or even curiosity, but with familiarity. As if something had already been decided. "That jacket belonged to Sergeant Ronald Ellison, didn't it?" he asked gently. Dorian nodded. "I'd know it anywhere," Hanley said. His voice was both rough and reverent. "Your grandfather was my squad leader. Iraq, 2005. Saved 9 of us during an ambush. Cost him his hearing in one ear. Never bragged. Never asked for medals. Just did what needed doing." Dorian swallowed hard, eyes wide. The general looked at the jacket. "May I?" he asked. Dorian looked to his mother, who gave the smallest of nods. He stepped back into his room, unzipped his hoodie, and returned holding the jacket, denim worn soft, patch stitched firm, history humming between the fibers. The general took it in both hands, like it was a flag. "Delta Company. 2nd Battalion," he said, brushing his fingers over the eagle. "We used to call it the shield. Meant you didn't leave your people behind. Ever." He looked up at Dorian. "Don't ever be ashamed to wear this." Dorian took the jacket back carefully, his hands trembling slightly now. "I'd like to mention Sergeant Ellison in the assembly today," Hanley added. "If that's all right with you." His mother nodded slowly, her voice catching. He'd have liked that. Hanley put his cap back on, gave one final nod, and turned back toward the SUV. No big farewell. No unnecessary words. Just purpose. Dorian stood in the doorway, jacket in his hands, pulse pounding. His mom looked at him sideways. "You still thinking about staying home?" He looked down at the jacket, then up toward the morning sky, pale and uncertain. "No," he said, pulling it on without hesitation. "I think I'm going to be early." She smiled, then disappeared down the hall to grab her keys. Dorian zipped up the jacket, not to hide from the world, but to face it. The weight on his shoulders hadn't changed. But suddenly, it didn't feel like something he had to survive. It felt like something he had to carry. And he was ready.